Okay, we are officially live for our regularly scheduled Tuesday chat. And today I have a very good friend and colleague of mine, Allie, joining us. And we are going to be talking all about fitness plans, specifically for all of our dog-powered sports. So canicross, scootering, bikejoring, if you run bigger teams on a rig. Today we're going to talk about the canine component of our fitness plans to make sure that all of you guys are hitting the trails with happy and healthy dogs. So first off, Allie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you mind kind of, for people who don't know you, give a little bit of background about your relation with the sport as well as your professional background?
Absolutely. So my name is Allie Lecznar, and I am with the Animal Scientist and Victoria Stillwell Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. Originally from Houston, Texas, though. Always have to throw out my Texas flair. I originally graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in applied biology, went to Karen Pryor Academy. I am a dog trainer, so I have my CPDT-KA, as well as I'm a FitPaws master trainer. I've found that when working with reactive dogs in high rises in Midtown Atlanta, a very important component that seemed to be missing was fitness. And especially when your dog is reactive, it's not super fun to take your dog out and walk all the time. So I was interested in learning how we could exercise our dogs without just walking all the time.
Yeah.
And from there, I found canicross, and I have been canicrossing myself since 2014 with my standard poodle, Klaus. So we've been we call him the either power poodle or race poodle, all those things. And he's a party poodle, so he's black and white, so he's in the Oreo club too. So we go Team Oreo.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And you mostly do canicross, but we're getting you on the bike.
Yes.
That too.
I guess it comes from also dating a guy that's really into mountain biking. And so I have now purchased a mountain bike, and I mountain bike regularly. And I have officially done single track with Chelsea. She got me out there and we did single track, and Klaus was awesome. So I should not have doubted.
He was good. I was so proud of you guys.
I was so impressed with him. So I am proud to say now that bikejoring has been added to the repertoire.
Excellent. So when we talk about dog-powered sports, a lot of it, especially for, some of our pet people that we're trying to get into this sport, we talk a lot about all of the benefits of it. We talk about how it works the whole dog, the brain and the body. It improves the relationship that people have with their dog. And it really does give you that dog that's completely exhausted. One of the things that I know that you preach as well is we can't just run the dog, right? Like we say a tired dog is a good dog, but that means a balance in both physical and mental exertion from the dog. And canicross and bikejoring are really nice because they give our dogs that. They're having to work and listen to different cues and directions while they're on the trail, and they're getting to work with you as a team. So the other side of that, besides it just being really beneficial for our dogs, is that it is a sport. It is a sport we can do with our dogs. And we think about sports, track and soccer that we maybe used to do back when we were in school. And all of those programs have athletes that have fitness plans, right? But we don't necessarily think of canicross and bikejoring as being a sport in which our dogs are the athletes. So talk to me a little bit about, why a healthy dog without any issues might need to have a fitness plan when doing hiking, canicross, and bikejoring.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great point, Chelsea. You think about it, I was actually recruited for D1 sports when I was coming out of high school. And one thing they were looking for is they wanted someone that does cross training. They wanted someone that does multiple sports, because you can have an increase in risk of injury when you just do this one repetitive thing over and over and over again. So that's why I also love to see our conformation folks in dog sports and doing the things their dogs are bred to do, but also maybe doing some things that their dogs weren't totally bred to do, but they're getting out there and they're doing the proper conditioning in order to do these exercises. Yeah. So one thing, when we all know that fitness is important, resources like Vet Street say that it's a necessity for maintaining optimal physical and mental performance. And fitness can increase trunk and core strength, which would be really helpful for conformation and rally obedience and any of our other activities. It can also stabilize weak areas. I'm a big preacher of fitness for injury prevention. So even if you just have a pet dog and he seems really happy and active, fitness can help keep him injury free. It can also improve balance and awareness, as well as reaction and control. So if you feel like your dog's just out of control, if you have a big goofy lab, or he just feels like he's all legs,
or they're around the backyard and it looks like the rear end is just along for the ride, like not attached to the dog at all.
Where is that rear end? Is it even, do they even know they have one? So if you just feel like your dog is arms and legs and he constantly like steps on your feet or jumps on you or trips over himself, fitness can help bring awareness to the body. And I know, Chelsea, you come from the horse world, and we talk about how in horses, the conditioning of the body is so important, that horses just, yes, they can move almost right out of the womb, but they may not know how to move in the best way to strengthen themselves and how to carry themselves, just like humans. You should, next time you go to the grocery store, because that's all we really go to now, is just watch different people walk and watch how they carry themselves. And are they tightening their core when they walk? Are their shoulders back? Are they walking pigeon-toed? And just even watching how people carry themselves. We aren't just born walking and running perfectly. That's why we have running coaches and things. Yeah. So having a fitness plan can help your dog move in a way that will help build strength and awareness. And then also specificity. So whether we want to focus on endurance or strength, we want to think about, what do we really want this dog to be able to do? I consider, oh my goodness, how many times, Chelsea, have we gone to the park and you see this person out there with his dog, and you can tell he loves his dog. He has this lab and he has the chuck it arm, and he just throws it and throws it and throws it. And he says that he does that every day for an hour. And we think, gosh, isn't that dog fit? But what a certified canine fitness trainer like myself thinks is, oh my gosh, that is a lot of repetition. And we really are kind of training him to be this athlete, this sprinter, but is that what we really want? So getting back to the question of fitness and why is it important, is we just think about ourselves and how important it is to be intentional with the way we move, and to bring that concentration and build up the strength so we can do the things we want to do with our dogs, like these awesome dog-powered sports, and give them the body that's actually able to do the things we're asking them to do.
Yeah. When I started incorporating a fitness plan in for my dogs, obviously we had it from the start, from conformation, to make sure that they were well muscled and looked good in the ring, right? Kind of performing at their best. But for dog-powered sports, you really see it with that powerful drive, that push off. You see it in how easily and coordinated they can navigate turns, navigate rocks and roots. And it really does make a big difference. And I agree with you completely. I am on board with, everybody having a fitness plan for their dog for injury prevention, because even if you think, well, my dog isn't that lab we were talking about, where the front end and the rear end just are on different pages, but how many times have you opened the back door to your house and your dog sprints out into the yard with no warm up, right? Flies down the steps. How many times have we taken a stagnant, laying, relaxed dog, gone outside and played fetch, right? And all of these activities that we're doing with our dogs, even if we're just walking in the neighborhood, hiking, doing a little bit of canicross, all of it requires a lot of control and a lot of strength. And so the more we build that up, the easier it's going to be for our dogs to not only do the sport, but do it well and with less injury. So I'm a big fan of that. I think one of the concerns that people have, as do I, when I add anything else to my program, it's like, oh dear Lord, how much time is this really going to take? How much of an investment do I need to put in to really make a difference for my dog? So can you talk just a little bit about how much time commitment it might take? Because I think people think it's going to be a lot more than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the point that you brought up about letting the dog out into the backyard, because for the very first time in COVID, I have a backyard. So I've been shacking up with my boyfriend up here north of the city, and I'm used to living in an apartment and not having any space for Klaus. We have a treadmill, and I'm used to driving him to places. But now, just let him out in the backyard. And what's out in the backyard? It's not just grass; it's a deck. A wet wood deck, stairs to get to the grass and the roots and things. And what does he do? We do, of course, I'm a dog trainer. We do a nice sit and a wait at the door. You open the door, you say, okay, and then he dashes out the door. and we think about what that would be like. As humans, we think so obviously, especially I'm getting a little bit older, in my 30s, not as spry as I used to be in my 20s. And so getting up and saying, oh, well, let me just go sprint. I was walking the other day in the park and some kid's soccer ball dribbled across. And I thought, oh, I'll just go sprint and throw this back to them. And oh my gosh, I kind of hurt my shoulder, kind of sprinting over there from not really doing anything beforehand. It's really tough. And you think, obviously, as an adult, we shouldn't just go sprint without warming up first or throw something really, really hard. And same thing with our dogs, is we want to think about that. But it doesn't mean that you have to enroll your dog in like a high school athlete or a college athlete level program. It can be something as simple as doing a couple spins and sit to stands before you release your dog out the door.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about having a dog, if you do have some time. Say you're that guy with the Chuck It that spends an hour with his dog. That's incredible to spend that much time with your dog. You're building your bond, you're having a good time, and you want to exercise your dog. He could spend even half that time doing a fitness plan. So I'm talking 30 minutes. I would say anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on your fitness goals, would be kind of the ideal place to start, just to get and work it into your routine and make it a part of what you're already doing, so that you don't have to, it's not like signing up for a new gym membership and then we see that this is a new habit that's just not going to stick. So you definitely want something that we're actually going to do.
Yeah. I love get into routine because I do the same thing. It has become, we do it 4 or 5 days a week. I've got what I need set up, and we just go into the room and we work the dogs for their breakfast. And then they're like completely exhausted afterwards. And it's not because they've done, a 3-mile bike tour ride, but I've worked the brain, worked the body. I've got 2 dogs. So one is working on maintaining a settle on a mat while the other one's working, and we switch, and it really is not a huge time commitment, but it becomes part of the routine. Then the dogs get used to it. I get used to it, and it really does help us reach that goal. So when we're talking about dog sports in particular, we obviously know it requires a lot of core strength, a lot of abdominals, a lot of paxial strength along the spine, and then quite a bit of strength from the rear end. And along with that strength, we also need balance. We need flexibility. So when you're working on a fitness plan that's particular to dog-powered sports, are you focusing on the dog more as a whole, or are you targeting a little bit more intensely those areas we know that the dog is going to be using?
Yeah, as a FitPaws master trainer, I use their 5 elements, which are balance, strength, cardio, mental, and flexibility. We do think it's really important to incorporate mental exercises because that can help our dogs. I can't tell you how many of my clients that had reactive dogs in Atlanta were amazed at how tired their dog was after just even 10 minutes of doing some exercises. Mm-hmm. And they thought that they had to walk their dogs for 30 minutes to an hour a day. And these are Vizslas, German short hair pointers, and not saying we don't need to go out there and get some exercise too, but they were just amazed at how much even a sniffy walk or any other types of enrichment could replace this walking. And I do kind of want to point out that walking a Vizsla for 30 minutes, especially without sniffing, if you're just in heel, is not really exercise. When you think that these dogs were bred to hunt in the fields for hours at a time, this is not really going to help our dogs out. So incorporating some fitness saves you time by helping you get the most out of the time you're spending with your dog. Yeah. But when it comes to dog-powered fitness plans, focus is, I would say, on strength and definitely in the rear end. I just took a rear end awareness course with Bobby Lyons, and she had some really interesting ideas of teaching rear end awareness, where a lot of people are going literally backwards with rear end awareness of a lot of backups, which can be good. She goes forwards. And like you said before, Chelsea, she works on driving off the rear end. But I believe that 60% of the dog's weight is on their front end. So we do want to work on the strength of their forelimbs to hold themselves up. But we want to start shifting. Instead of pulling with the front legs, we want to start driving from behind. It's just like in the horse world. We want to start giving them, instead of being front wheel drive, we kind of want to give them all wheel drive and move to that rear end awareness. So I would focus on strength, cardio, of course, because we will be running, but then also flexibility and proprioception. So working on balance and coordination is key. one thing my boyfriend said is that he has a husky that was bred for this, and she does really well, and she's about 2 years old, so she's just getting started. Whereas Klaus, my standard poodle, has been doing this for 7 years, and we do so much proprioception work with him because he was sensitive to surfaces in the beginning. We worked with a certified canine rehab practitioner and his orthopedic vet. And he is so trail savvy. He knows where roots are. He can feel them, the way he navigates. He's just a pro, whereas the husky still trips over her feet. Finding that balance of those 4 things, I say, would be the key to dog-powered fitness.
Yeah. I like flexibility and perception too, because a lot of the times, even with people, we think of lifting weights, we think of doing cardio, and we often forget the importance of working on body awareness, working on flexibility, so adding for us humans as the runners and bikers, adding things in like yoga to really make sure that you're stretching everything out that's getting tightened with all of this cardio strength, right? And then working on things like plyometrics to get those feet moving faster, to know where they are underneath you, and for the dogs, obviously we aren't doing plyometrics in quite the same manner, but we can do little things at home that don't require a lot of equipment. And as you know, Allie, I do quite a bit of fitness with mine as well. So we've got all the things, right? You and I, we have the dog treadmill, we have the balance discs and the Fit Paws equipment, but you don't need a ton of things to get started. You can do easy things at home, like you mentioned, with spins that work on body awareness and gentle stretching, and then, sit to stand. So can you go over a couple exercises that everybody watching at home could easily incorporate into their routine with their dog to start working on a little bit more fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to split it into 2. I'd like to give 3 exercises for those just starting out, and then 3 exercises for those that are a little bit more experienced and are familiar with exercise equipment. So for those of you just starting out, no equipment's really needed. Honestly, the best thing to do is to start on the ground. It's the same thing with horses, with dogs, with people. I know the exercise equipment looks really fun. It's bright. I love their marketing. It looks really fun that you want to interact with this stuff. But getting a firm foundation on the ground is going to be the best thing. So just a simple sit to stand transition is kind of like doing a squat for your dog. And just asking them to sit and stand, you do about 3 to 5 reps for your dog, and then maybe 2 to 3 sets. But you want to see how tired your dog gets. Sometimes I can't fathom how many times puppies sit in puppy class. You go to puppy class and you see how many times they make the dog sit, and it's like 5 to 10 times, and then 3 sets of that. And the puppies stop sitting at the end. And people are thinking, oh my gosh, I thought we knew this cue. Why isn't my dog sitting? It's like, well, he's really tired. His little buns are tired. So I think it is important to notice when your dog's fatiguing and start kind of sure to stop right when that's happening so that our dogs want to come back and want to do more. Also, a spin. Teaching your dog to spin right and left is a great way to get flexibility in there. And then the third one I would recommend is some loose leash walking or jogging. And if you want to get super fancy with it, you can put some poles on the ground. So that's when you would bring in, I remember I used to use broom handles, mop handles, get some gardening tools out. Anything you can find to put on the ground and space them out. The best way to space them out is to measure from your dog's shoulder to the floor. That's a great way to start. You can put them a little bit closer if your dog is struggling, but just walking them over those poles kind of forces them to think, where are my feet, tighten up their core, and focus on carrying their limbs through the next pole. So those are the 3: sit to stand, spin, and then a jog or cavaletti work for those starter homes.
So I'm gonna real quick. So for the sit to stands, if we're getting technical, do you have a preference between a sit to stand where, let's say you ask the dog to sit and then lure them forward, so the front end is moving forward, versus a sit and then what we call a kickback stand where the front feet stay stationary and the rear end kicks back? Do you have a preference between the 2?
Yes. So I love that you brought up that difference. When I'm starting with pet homes, I kind of tend to see how interested the person is in fitness, and whether if we just want to get them started, I don't really care which one they do, just as long as we're working on the dog's rear end. But If we're focusing on dog-powered sports, I would think that driving forward is what we want. So luring the dog out of the sit and having them push off their back and push forward is going to be the key. But I do like the kickback stand. The benefit there is the core strength that we're going to have of driving out from behind, putting all the weight on the forelimbs and driving out from behind is going to work on that core strength.
Yeah, nice. And then whatever you guys do anyway, make sure you do together. So when we're doing spin repetitions, we want to spin in both directions. And a lot of times people will notice a preference in their dogs when they're doing this, that it's easier for their dog to spin one direction. The other thing I want to mention with the spins is that a lot of people teach spin on cue. And if you think of like, let's think of like a border collie or maybe a Vizsla that's really, really fast with everything they do. A lot of the times that's not quite as beneficial for the dog because they're not focusing on where each foot is. So even if the dog knows spin on cue, when I'm doing spins for fitness, I would even just use a food lure or a hand target to follow to kind of slow the dog down so that they're thinking a little bit more about where those feet are.
Mm-hmm. And many times you'll see warm-ups that include going just stretching from the nose to the shoulder or the nose to the hip, which I like to do kind of in a rush because I don't have all the time in the world. That I'll use a hand target and kind of slowly go to the shoulder, slowly go to the hip, and then bring it all the way around in a spin and kind of get the benefit of all three in one.
Yeah. And then with the I know a lot of people struggle with their dog pacing. So pacing is where if you look at your dog's feet, we've got 4 feet, right? So 2 in the front and 2 in the back. They will move together. So you'll see one side of the dog move forward and then the other side. That's called pacing versus trotting, where you'll see opposite or diagonal. So you'll see the back right go forward and the front left. So pacing, I know that you have some experience working with that with your boy as well, but cavalettis are excellent for pacers because it can help break them out of the pace and into a trot. So if you find that your dog is pacing quite a bit in harness, working on cavalettis is going to be really helpful for you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Klaus is a serial pacer that we have done a lot of work with, and it turns out that his legs are really long, and that's kind of his most efficient gait. But we do work on cavalettis a lot to work on that core strength.
Yeah. So now you mentioned some more advanced exercises that you like to include as well. So talk to us about those.
Yeah, for the homes that you do have some equipment, you're used to working on the equipment used to working with canine conditioning exercises. Rear targeting, like moving forward. So many people will teach a rear target, and what I mean by that is you put a mat on the floor and you teach your dog to walk backwards and put his back paws on the mat. That can be great and a fun, really enriching exercise. But one thing that I learned from the rear end awareness course with Bobby Lyons is she wants to focus on driving forward rather than driving backward. So instead, she has the dog walk across the mat, and then captures the dog standing with back feet on the mat. So it's just kind of a spin on rear end awareness, is instead of having your dog back up to the mat, have your dog go forward and capture your dog pushing off of that mat. So it's a really interesting spin on that. Another one is rear weight shifts. So have your dog, if you're just starting out, have your dog flat on the floor, and we're capturing any shift back. So if your dog's standing there, sometimes they'll start to shift into a sit, and you can kind of capture that for a second, but we will want to get the legs all the way out into a proper, almost stacked. And we'll start to look for that behavior. We can lure it with a food lure, can move our hand back a little bit, or use a target. And then we can get that dog up once they're comfortable and confident on the ground, get them up on some fit bones or some balance pads, or even if you just have a bed is a great thing to do, an unstable surface, so that the dog can engage the toes and the muscles in the forelimbs to start to lean backwards as well. And then the last one is called a pop-up. And a pop-up is a nose target that the dog is going to pop up and just touch your hand. It's not quite like a sit pretty. It's almost like a quick little version of a sit pretty. and the dog will be in a sit, and then you'll ask them just to pop up and then back down. So it's engaging the core, it's engaging those glutes, and having your dog kind of pop up in just almost like a little squat. And so doing a couple of those is a great way to build that rear end awareness, especially for our dog powered sports.
Yeah, and I like those quick wrap-ups a lot better than working on something like Sit Pretty. You know, they have found, for anyone watching, they have found that that's not great for the spine, can cause some compression. So you still get the benefits of engaging that core, but without, you know, the damaging effects of getting them fully back weight bearing on that spine. So I like that. I like that a lot. So one thing that's really important too, and we kind of briefly mentioned it when we were talking about the dogs darting out the door and why that made us cringe, right? Because the body is not prepared yet for that type of activity. One thing I hit really hard in our intro to mushing class online is really working on warm-ups and cool-downs, making sure that we are doing the right kinds of things at the right kind of moment, because stretches are great, but stretches on muscles that are not warmed up can actually be quite damaging. So let's start with warm-ups. You know, when we're talking about warm-ups, we're talking about engaging in activities that are going to be pretty similar to what the dog is going to have to do during the event, right? Making sure that all of the little connecting tissues and muscle groups that we need for the sport are warmed up. So when we're talking about dog-powered sports, we know that that's the dog in whole, but also, you know, particular focus on rear and core. So what are some tips that you could give for people in terms of, you know, duration of warm-up, specific things you would recommend that they focus on for the different dog-powered sports?
Yeah, I like to keep warm-ups pretty simple, especially because dogs tend to be pretty pumped up when they get to the trail and where they're about to be running. But it's really is important to warm your dog up. We want to get blood flow to those muscles. We want to get their body temperature up. And this can lead to improved muscle contraction time. It can increase their reaction time and get oxygen flowing into those muscles, and also avoid some common injuries. So if we think about using a warm-up as injury prevention, if we're looking at things like agility, there was a study, I think it was like Cullen and his colleagues in 2013 found that most agility dogs suffer from shoulder and spine injuries. So that's the most common injury, whereas canicross, La Fuente in 2018 found that that was mostly forelimbs and legs. So like, the paw pads and things. So mostly from, in canicross, it wasn't so much like ligaments and things as it was just straight up tears and trauma from sticks and things. But if we're thinking about injury prevention in that case, we're focusing on the back, the shoulders, and the paws. So we're going to want to warm up those paws. So sometimes I do like to do a little bit of manipulation of the toes and just some walking and trotting. So I would spend about 10 to 15 minutes warming up Klaus before we go for a run. And particularly if we are going to go bike joring, or we're going to be doing a serious, a really hard session in canicross, we're going to be doing some reps and some sprinting. So I start off with the walking and trotting, just some snippy walks, also make sure he takes care of his business, and some sit to stands. So we're going to want to be looking at the rear end with the sit to stands. I also like down to stands, but we're looking at a folding down. So normally your dog, if we're being a little lazy, we kind of just plop down, maybe the back first and then the front, where in a folding down, the dog folds into the down and has to engage that core. So that'll get us ready. The one thing we want to avoid is doing anything kind of jarring. So for instance, tugging or jumping or playing ball is not the best way to warm up. That's kind of the end goal, is to get to those types of behaviors. So just thinking about, what am I about to do with my dog? What body parts am I about to engage in? And how can I warm those joints and those muscles up?
Yeah. And then with cool downs, our focus is a little bit different. You know, one of the things we want to make sure that we avoid in our warm up, you know, you mentioned a little bit of manipulation of the toes. We do that too, to kind of get all those little joints open and moving. But we want to avoid static stretching during our warm-up. We want to avoid physically putting our arms on the dog and stretching a forelimb forward or stretching a rear leg. But some of that can be okay to incorporate in our cool down routine. So talk to us a little bit about how the cool down routine looks different than our warm-ups.
So while the warm-up is preparing the dog for activity, the cool down is preparing the dog to rest. So I even change my attitude when we're done running. I reinforce my dog. We have a really good time. We have pats right after we're running, and then I just start to slow down. I start to slow my breathing down, start to walk, decrease my speed, really start to walk a little slower, sniffy walks, thinking about having deep, calming breaths, and start talking to my dog in a calming way too. The last thing we want to do is to get done bike joring and then throw our dog in the car. Even though it could be really hot down here in the South, we want to get him in that AC. We do want to slow the dog's heart rate down. We want to get him ready before we just put it all up in the car. So I like to do warm-ups in reverse. So I like to do cool downs as my warm up in reverse. So if I did down to sit stands, I may let him lay down because he may want to lay down for a second, get some water, do a couple of those transitions, and then do some walking and trotting. So we'll start just with some loose leash running together, really trotting together, and then slow down to a walk. I do stretch my dog sometimes, although I don't recommend it to clients that often, just because it can be it's difficult. It's difficult to know. It's hard to stretch ourselves and how far we should be stretching, let alone a dog. And we don't really know what feels good for them, especially if we can't recognize signs of pain or a little too much. So there is a great resource. I think it's, The Right Way to Stretch Your Dog is a DVD that's helpful. I will stretch class out occasionally, but most of the time I think it's best, especially for pet dog homes, is just to walk your dog out and let your dog do the stretching. They do stretch. If you see them get off the couch, they do stretch themselves, but the walking and the cool down is going to be key.
Yeah. Back to normal, putting them up into a crate or into a confined space in the car where everything is going to tighten again. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to get loose again. And I love that point about doing loose leash jogging and walking. I agree. So obviously we had a talk a couple of weeks ago on this page about harnesses. How harnesses, when we're using them for pulling, that's what we want to rehearse in our pulling harnesses. But as part of that cool down, we want to make sure that that dog is able to loosen everything up without that harness. So, I bring them back to the car. We let them get some water. We tell them, what a good boy you were, get really happy and let them know they did a good job. Maybe even give them like a little piece of jerky or something for getting back to the car. And then I take the harness off. Because now it's cool down mode. Now we're relaxing. And so we'll do a lot of, a little bit of slow jogging, a little bit of walking, still letting them sniff and kind of move at their pace, but giving them time to loosen up without that harness and without that pressure. I think that's really important. And it can be hard for some people. If you're having trouble teaching loose leash walking or differentiating between the two, we've got some videos I can link to on our YouTube channel. But it's really important that dogs understand the difference and can do both. It's going to be very important for their well-being. We don't just want them pulling all the time.
I find it helpful to do an equipment change. Just like Chelsea said, I switch my dog's equipment as well, and we'll switch to a collar. And sometimes I'll even switch to a waist leash instead of my canicross hip belt. But I do want to say that it's not a magic wand. Yeah. So your dog doesn't magically know that when you take off the pulling harness, we're not supposed to pull anymore. But it can be something that we can learn by association. So continuing to train and to get, to work on your loose leash walking in a certain harness or a collar is a great way to help your dog transition, but it's not a magic wand.
Yeah. It's not. It's for sure on our part with the dogs, and continuing to make sure that we're reinforcing the right kinds of behaviors in certain pieces of equipment. But hopefully our dogs will be nice and relaxed and tired from that run that we just got in. So getting loose leash after the pulling should be a little bit easier for them. So let's talk a little bit about, we just talked about warm-ups and cool downs, and we talked about them specifically for our dog-powered sports. Let's talk real quick, because for our dog-powered people, it's not like that's the only thing we're doing with them, right? And hopefully we've been doing a lot of other things and cross-training, but when we're going out and doing our other physical activities, like maybe fetch or frisbee or, just free play in the backyard, what kind of warm-ups and cool downs should people be doing with those activities as well? Because those are still, they can be high impact, they can be, our aerobic exercises. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that fetch can be even the higher impact than canicross at times, especially if you just kind of jog with your dog in canicross. When they are fetching, your dog is pretty much running as hard as he possibly can, especially if you've got a very ball-driven dog or sliding, and also they're going to push it because they're going to try and catch that ball on the bounce. So they're going to try and push themselves a little farther. They're going to spread their legs a little longer. They're going to move that, what's that tertiary plane, as they're going to twist that back a little bit because they're having fun. They're trying to play and they're not focusing on maybe keeping themselves super safe at the time. So it's very important to warm up and cool down our dogs when we're going to play. So for example, Klaus is a hardcore ball guy. He is definitely team ball. And so before we go play, I put him on leash when we go out back, and I'll put him on leash in a harness and we walk outside together. We do a decompression sniffy walk and just get started, get warmed up a little bit. And I'll do some spins. I want to focus on a lot of spine and neck movement. So I'll do a lot of flexibility of turning him to one shoulder, turning him to his hip, exercise those toes a little bit. And then I will do some folding downs, down to stand transitions. And then we'll start to just throw the ball a little bit. So I like to incorporate training into fetch. I'll call it like dynamic fetch. So I'll have him, maybe I'll ask for a touch and a sit and a stay, and I'll back up and I'll toss the ball to him. Mm-hmm. So the ball is more going to him rather than him sprinting to the ball. And I do very few repetitions where I throw the ball as far as I can and he goes and gets it as hard as he can. I like to switch it up between tossing it short, tossing it easy, tossing it to one side or the other. So the whole exercise really is part of a planned routine rather than just mindlessly throwing the ball as hard as you can the whole time. And for cool downs, I would do that same thing in reverse. So again, I'm going to do some down to stand transitions, and then we're going to go for a nice slow decompression sniffy walk afterwards. And this whole thing doesn't take that long. I'm spending about 5 to 10 minutes for that warm up, and I'll throw the ball for maybe 15 minutes and then another 5 to 10 minute cool down. And it really takes me less than an hour, less than 30 minutes if we're doing a short session.
Yeah. Reminding people that warm up and cool down is important before all activities, not just our dog powered sports, because the last thing we want is to be amping up our season, getting ready for fall or early spring races, and then our dog injures themselves, playing fetch in the backyard. Like that would be horrible. So make sure that you guys are being mindful about that. Your dogs are athletes. They need warm-ups and cool downs before all activities that they're doing, as do you humans. So make sure you're doing your part too. So one thing I want to talk about too that we push pretty hard over the summer is cross training. I know it's, especially where we live, it's really warm. It's not always easy to get our dogs out. Trust me, I have Alaskan Malamutes. They wear wool coats even when they're naked in the summer. So they are always carrying extra with them. But it's important that if we want to be active in the fall and winter, that we don't just let them be couch potatoes all summer, right? We got to keep them moving. And there's certainly different ways to do that safely with the heat. We do a lot of swimming. We do a lot of hiking. We do a lot of early morning, walks or slow jogs, a lot of enrichment, indoor fitness, of course. For everybody, as they're starting to amp up their season, of course, we need to be mindful and realistic. How much cross training did we actually do over the summer? But as we're starting to run more and we're increasing our exercise with these beautiful fall mornings, what are some things that people should watch out for that could be signs that maybe their dog is starting to get a little stiff or sore? And, as we look at injury prevention at the start of our season.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There have been a couple studies looking at dog owners' ability to recognize pain in their own dogs. And it turns out we're not really great at recognizing pain in dogs because their signs are so subtle. And there's another statistic, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it was something like dogs only limp when more than 30% of the weight is compromised on that limb. So whereas humans is like 10%. So we're kind of weak to that. If we get hurt and it hurts a little bit, we're gonna limp. Whereas dogs really don't limp unless it's almost absolutely necessary. So limping is definitely a sign that we need to go to the vet and go get a checkup. And I will say that we should always go to the vet and get a clear checkup before we engage in any canine conditioning plan. But when we're looking, when we're checking our dogs all the time, we can look for things like transitions just around the house. When your dog is sitting or lying down or gets up off the couch or gets up off the bed, are they reluctant to get up? You know, before, if your dog knows a great off, like off the bed or off the couch, and you ask them to get off and they're hesitant, maybe they were just super comfy. But if it seems to become a trend, maybe it's painful for them to get up. Same thing for favoring sides. If your dog does sit a little sloppy, you know, we like to get square sits, especially when we're doing some formal fitness exercises. We want the dog's hocks and legs to be lined up. But if the dog sits to one side, you want to note what side it is. Do they always sit on their left hip? And what may that mean? And then same thing with directions. If, like Chelsea said before, if your dog is struggling to spin to the left, that may mean that there's some stiffness either in the neck or the spine. And looking for signs of pain would be like excessive grooming. If your dog is licking themselves, a head bob, usually limping starts as just a little head bob rather than a full limp. Dragging or scuffing paw pads, although we do have some dogs that just may drag their nails across the floor, which I'm sure Chelsea has talked about nail care quite a bit. And then finally, shaking or trembling. So if your dog is kind of excessively panting or shaking or trembling, that's when we want to go and get a vet check, but also on equipment. So many times you'll see people think they're really hardcore because their dog is really struggling on the equipment. That's a sign for me to go back down to the ground. We want to take it down a level and be sure that our dog is doing really well on the ground before we move up to equipment. It's tempting because you want your dog to be like Doggy Rambo and have these hardcore workouts, but that may be a sign that we should back off a little bit. And same thing for like when we're doing canicross and we feel so good because we're done and our dog's tongue is hanging out the side of his mouth and they're laying down, they can barely get up. It is important just from a training perspective too, to maybe stop a little sooner next time. That you want to leave your dog wanting a little more and not exercise them to excess every time.
Yeah. That's too. And with injury prevention and with preventing burnout, you know, I think a lot of the times when we're trying to amp up mileage in the fall, we can think, oh, well, they just need to push through this to be able to add in that mileage. But what we're doing is we're actually decreasing drive. We're making it, harder for our dogs and more likely for them to injure themselves. So I like that you mentioned that. I mention a lot to people, and when your dog still wants more, and that can be really hard for us to do, I'll be the first to tell you, I might have a plan of going out and doing 5 miles on the bike, but if my dog stops pulling at 1, we're done. Because that's not normal for them. So if they're doing that, I need to respect the signals that they are giving. And, sometimes that messes up our training plan, but it's what's important for them in the long run. And so I think being able to really know your dog, to watch for those subtle signs and not just blow them off, to really listen to them and respect them is really important.
And that's why I like dog-powered sports, is because you can't push a rope. So if your dog is not pulling, it really is a sign that we should stop. And, Klaus, sometimes he'll go and just start peeing a lot and he'll want to stop and pee. And that's not normal for him. So I'll know that means, that's when I ended up teaching him to come into heel when he wants to stop. Mm-hmm. And he's pretty great about that really he doesn't do it that often, but occasionally if it's a little more humid than we had planned, he will come into heel and he's asking, Mom, I can't do it today. And we will stop. And sometimes he'll tell me when he's ready to go again.
And that's important too. Sometimes if we're taking a break, it doesn't necessarily always mean the running is done. Sometimes it just means, hey, we're going to let that heart rate decrease a little. Maybe we're going to let them get some water. Maybe we're going to walk for a little, let them sniff, let them do some peeing, and then they might be ready to go. But I think, again, too, that is when you need to make sure that you know your dog and that you're watching for those little signals, because as you know, being a trainer, it's very easy for clients to think they know what's going on and to miss those subtle signals that our dogs are giving us that they are under stress. So that's important for us to learn how to communicate with our dog, learn how they communicate with us, and don't just assume right off the bat that they're being stubborn or they're lazy. Respect the information that they're giving, because it's important. We need to listen to it. And
yeah, for Klaus, it's usually about hydration, that he's telling me I am too thirsty. And if I give him some water, he's like, okay, ready to go. Or it could also be about the surface. If the surface has, especially those fire roads that tend to have slightly bigger rocks than we had planned, or if the hill was a little bit more of a grade than we thought it was, that paying attention to those surfaces is going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think to keep and ready to go for season 2, building up those feet, keeping those feet in good shape. There are certain surfaces, and unfortunately, it's a pretty common surface at a lot of places, but my dogs are not a fan of the pea gravel. And unfortunately, they have it at a lot of the nice, more flat running trails. So we tend to stick to mountain bike trails when we're going out. But when they're running on that surface, they're more likely to veer off to the side. They're more likely to slow down. They're not pulling as hard. Of course, for me, from a training standpoint, I'm like, these are not the behaviors I want being rehearsed in this environment, right? This is not what I want to see. But even those surfaces, understanding like, okay, it feels weird under the dog's foot, and maybe it's sore, maybe it's hurting, and so being able to look at that, and now I know, okay, they don't like this surface, period. But if you're starting to see your dog becoming uncomfortable or displaying different behavior than they normally do, that's always something for us to go, okay, I'm paying attention. Well, what is this? And start to really identify that. I like that. So do you have any last pieces of wisdom for our people, or anything that we didn't cover today that you would like to about fitness plans for dog-powered sports?
I would just say try and focus on the whole dog, of using all 5 elements. If we want to use flexibility, balance, strength, cardio, and mental enrichment as well as a part of your fitness plans. You always want to talk to your vet before starting on a fitness plan. And that fitness doesn't have to involve super fancy equipment all the time. And the best fitness plan to start off on is working on the ground with your dog and doing behaviors that they already know, and using food lures to get the behaviors that you want to work on. And that fitness should be really fun for your dog, that we want to keep them learning and keep them wanting more, and ending just before we think that they're going to tire, so that we capture, because again, from a training perspective, we want to capture them having a really good time and capture them doing the behavior with the form we want. The last thing I'd like to leave the viewers with is my mantra of neutral head position. So neutral head position for anything we're doing is to try and keep your dog's head and spine neutral while you're doing all of these exercises. It's like the one thing that beginners tend to forget, is that when you are using a food lure, you want to keep your dog's head in line, and the spine in their natural line. So just however they carry their head naturally. You'll notice if you're trying to lure your dog and they're craning their neck, it's not the position we want them to be in. So if you do take anything away from this, just focus on trying the behaviors and focusing on your hand and where you're luring them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So there is an awesome, for people looking to learn a little more about canine fitness, there is an awesome Facebook group, Canine Conditioning and Body Awareness, and they've got some really nice pet pros in there that are giving you ideas on different exercises, and you can ask questions too. If you guys are local or looking to do a virtual consult, we are connected with Sherry at Pup Rehab, and she is fantastic. She's done some lives here on us, and she can help you both in person and virtual to get your training plan started. Like Ali said, before starting any fitness plan, it's always a good idea to get somebody's hands and eyes on your dog who knows what they're doing, so that they can make sure that we are addressing your dog, because yes, we can make all dogs fit, but each dog is going to have a little bit different needs or sensitivities or areas of weakness where we need to kind of fine tune. So I bring my dogs to Sherry, and they have different training plans, based on what their goals are and what their current areas of weakness are. So that's important as well. And then I wanted to let you guys all know that next week, we normally, our Facebook Live is normally on Tuesday, but next week it's actually going to be Monday. So it'll be Monday the 19th. Same time at noon, and we're going to be talking with Anna, who is very well versed in supplements and natural remedies for dogs. So we're going to be talking about things like anxiety and aggression and different ways that you can help support your dog in a more natural way. And that will be next Monday at noon. Ali, thank you so much for joining us today. Always wonderful talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Chelsea. This was really fun.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a good day, everybody.